Hi, my name is Ken Assenson. I wrote microbiome prescription website. By training is a software developer, artificial intelligence engineer, operation research person. And what I want to do today is do a walkthrough for a person in Spain who has been helping with Spanish translations. And what I want to do is walk through the steps and at the same time answers a bunch of other incidental questions I've been getting over the last couple of days. So first thing is she has her sample in there, and what I usually use, because this person has a chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, CFS history, and in fact is unable to work normally because of it. And like me, actually her condition seems to be stress related, which is what the triggers in general for me for my relapses have been. So I have empathy for it. I sort of understand where she's at. And the first thing I look at is for anybody with chronic fatigue syndrome or with long COVID, I go in and look at the overview. And this is what I call the percentages of percentiles. Which is sort of a tongue twister. But basically, in a well-balanced microbiome, the percentiles should have the number of people in each category about the same. It's basically becomes balanced. It sort of comes out of some statistical magic in terms of how things get transformed with percentiles and distributions and everything else. But the expected numbers are about the same. As you can see, in general, they are roughly the same. When you get to lower numbers, they're a little bit more, but you also have to have the higher number. But what really sticks out is these numbers. These are magnitudes above what they should be. And this is a pattern I keep seeing in most, not all, in most people with chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID. Which means, okay, it's a match. There's a overrepresentation of a low percentile bacteria, which is the first thing. Down below, we see things which are particularly concerning bacteroids, which I will show comes in a moment. So that's my very first step always. Usually my next step is always going over to health analysis and see what it is. This person has fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, appears to have inflammatory bowel syndrome, and possibly has GERDs. And if you take a look here, all the percentiles are pretty high for all of these, and it happens to correspond to what they have, which means that the prediction based on the microbiome seems to be reasonably good. There are other things that shows up, like colorectal cancer, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which often will show up because there tends to be an overlap of the bacteria involved with those things with these things, which means that it doesn't differentiate well between one and the other. If those shows up and none of the other ones shows up, then the odds are really good. But our limited knowledge is that these are probably, but not guaranteed to be, false positives, or false positive suggestion. Doesn't hurt. Person is over 55. Doesn't hurt for that, especially since most medical advice is if you have irritable bowel syndrome, other things, you should be checked for colon rectal cancer early, well before the typical ages. And in this case, it sort of suggests, yep, you probably should be. The next area down is identifying things which are particularly concerning. Nothing there jumps out. And then we have Jason's suggestion, and one of which is the bacteroids here. His range for what he wants to see is 0 to 20. She's at 44 percentile, which is the same thing which was identified on the prior screen. It was quite high. Things like E. coli is practically 0. Having a little bit of doing good. This one, the Faecilibacterium fazenti, is way low, and this one is well known to be an anti-inflammatory bacteria. It creates anti-inflammatory metabolites for the body, and if it's low, chances are you have an inflamed body, and inflamed body often will result in chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and other condition. So it just cascades out. Okay, at this point in time, I want to go over and look at getting suggestions because we're going to do a little bit more than the typical thing in this case. And one of the reasons is we have a bunch of these things which they have and which we have a very good match. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back here and just give me suggestions. Before I actually click that, I'm going to go over, and what just give me suggestion does is it executes this one, executes this one, executes this one, and executes this one, and it goes and does everything and does infer citation. So it basically does a whole bunch of things on this page from this group downwards in a single click. Takes a few seconds, but it makes life easy and you don't have to remember to do everything back and forth. And so we'll go and we have nothing here. When we do the just give me a suggestion, it will remove whatever has been done, which is why I'm doing it first, and then we'll go and look at some other things after to increase the number of suggestions. The reason we do suggestions is consensus is very simple. We really, to be honest, don't know exactly which ones to pick or which ones not to pick. In terms of actual knowing, we have people who will have definite opinions on there. Often influencers have preset beliefs without any evidence. And what we are doing is we're working from available evidence by making slightly different reasonable assumptions, coming up with suggestions, and then we put them all together and see what is absolutely agreed to by almost everybody, in which case no matter which set of suggestions, you still come up with the same item no matter how you decide to do the suggestions within reason. And what that does is it gives you suggestions which have a probably much higher confidence of actually causing effect. How much we don't know. What we can determine is what is likely to cause some effect, ideally a lot of it, but we don't have the data on how much effect it will cause. All we know is that it will cause some effect. Okay, so to go back, just give me suggestions, click here, and away we go. And you see up top here, it's spinning. And then we have suggestion. Now, this first page is intended for people who are brain fog and just overwhelmed. It gives you reasonable selection of items, simplified down. But if you go over to more technical suggestions, we get the whole kit and caboodle with 1,800 different items evaluated. But we're not going to stop there. What we are going to do is we actually go to, in this case, I think we'll hop over to research features because I want to show something. And we have the advanced suggestions here. And what it does, it says, okay, how do you want to do it? What we are going to, oh, rats, it's not there. Okay, it's available in another way, and let's go back to, actually not special studies. Let's go back to here, and down the bottom we have all the things for the public method. Again, we're going to jump up to everything. We're going to get things, and now we're going to do suggestions. And what we're going to do is we're going to click one of them. The first one we're going to do is chronic fatigue syndrome. Click here and we'll get suggestions. Opens up in a new window, which means we can go back and do something else. We can go up and do fibromyalgia next if we want to. And get suggestions again. There are the suggestions. We can go up to irritable bowel syndrome, which is here. Notice that we are 93 percentile, but we only have 16 or 68. Partially, the reason why we don't have 60 out of 68 is because the labs reporting it are coming from people using different lab software. Many bacteria here are not reported on the lab being used, which means that we get what I call very sparse data. But given the information we have from people with just master list and which way things are shifted, and the lab which we are using, we end up at 93 percentile. In other words, we have probably a pretty close match, but we don't know for sure. So we go down here, get suggestions, wait for it to finish spinning up top. And the last one which we're going to do was GERDs, which is up here. And get suggestions. Wait for it to finish spinning. And we go back. And now if we just do a refresh the page, we see we have 8 packages now. So we have taken the just give me suggestions, and we added in 4 more sets of suggestions to it. Okay, so we can go in and do view consensus suggestions, which gives us there. And what we have is we have a calculation based on these 4 numbers, and my original take was we use the 4 numbers and have people sort them out. Many people said, it's too confusing, I don't get it, I'm lousy at math, I'm lousy at this type of thing. Just give me one number. So I basically took these 4 numbers, did some experiments, came out with a reasonable algorithm, and we end up here, and the first thing we see is a probiotic, which is nice. Another probiotic, cacao. All of those are the top items. Cacao, I know from studies actually funded by Nestle, does improve chronic fatigue syndrome. So that is extremely reasonable suggestion there. High fiber diet, often. Lauric acid, coconut oil used for cooking, or use monolaurin, which is a different form as a supplement. We now get into possible antibiotics. This particular one is quite commonly used for chronic fatigue syndrome, etc. So we could go to the top and we could say, okay, we sort, and what we're going to do is have only those with 8s being the top ones, whichever was the ones that it's absolutely clear it's there, and we have a list of things here, and we can go in and take a look at those which are 7 at the very bottom of the end, and I'm actually going to just click priority here. We have things that should be avoided. Stevia should be avoided. It's not healthy for everyone. High red meat diet, interstitial lactobacillus rhamnosus. Many lactobacillus actually can make chronic fatigue syndrome worse. Nuts, propylene. So we have here a variety of things which should be reduced or eliminated. Berberine right now on TikTok is being promoted ad nauseum as a magical supplement that does all sorts of wonders. Our calculation shows that it's not going to help very much, and in fact it's probably going to hurt. Other things are things which sometimes show up high on the to-do list, to-take list, and other times it's low on the to-take list. So it goes back and forth. Okay, so basically from this, I'm going to build up a list of suggestions for her, just going through, using a bit of common sense, and more importantly, using my memory of what is being used successfully for chronic fatigue syndrome in order to add a, not just 8 layer of suggestion, a 9th layer, which is that of studies done with substances for chronic fatigue syndrome. Remember, most of those studies will have 60% responder, 70% responder, 80% responder. By looking at the microbiome, we are trying to find things which has positive microbiome impact, because I believe that will increase the odds from being a 6% responder for this particular person to 90 or 95% responder. In other words, the mechanism by which it actually does it is via the microbiome, and if we know it's going to help the microbiome, then we are probably sitting at a pretty sweet little choice. Okay, now I'm going to quickly hop into a couple of other things. Just for a quick thing, we have suggested probiotics, which is based on information from the Kyoto Encyclopedia of Genomics, and it is a experimental way. What I do is I calculate out what is being produced by your microbiome, what percentile you are compared to other people, and things which you are very low in. Are there any probiotics which produces the same particular thing? If they are, we list it, and so let's see what we come up with. And my typical for chronic fatigue syndrome, not all, but many is estrogen coli, which person has 0 in. Mutaflor is, I believe, available, which this person is in Spain. Not everybody can get it. It's only in Australia, Canada, UK, Germany, and a few other places. So it tends to be an elusive probiotic. It needs to be refrigerated, which adds to the challenges. The number here is at 300, which is good. Generally, 200 is where I'm not quite sure if it's really going to be significant. At 300, usually I would do it. As a quick the name down here are using the current name, and sometimes the same systems has a different name there. And all of these are items available in a probiotic somewhere in the world. You may have troubles actually finding them. In some cases, great amount of troubles. So it goes here, and sometimes it'll be for where you live in the world, compete wipeout. In this case, we have a possible winner, the E. coli there. Now, what I would usually do is I go back to the, where do we have? To the consensus and do a double check. What I'm going to do is type in Mutaflor. And what I'm doing is I'm double checking to make sure that Mutaflor comes out as being one which will be beneficial in terms of one way of calculating things, a totally different independent way of calculating things. It also came out being a good one. So in other words, we have additional consensus happening. We actually, in this case, we have 6 of the 8 consensus saying take it. 2 of them say has no opinion. We're using the Kyoto Encyclopedia of Genomics, and we have yes, take it. So it becomes definitely something to take. And let's go back to the other thing. The other thing is just a supplement, which is done in a similar way. It calculates out all of the production which the microbiome does, a variety of chemicals, and see which ones the person's microbiome seems to be producing less of. And if it's producing less of, it is probably starving other bacteria, which means that if you provide it as a supplement, those other bacteria are probably going to get happy and improved. So that is the logic of it. And we'll click and we take a look at it. And we have a relatively short list. We have malic acid. Typically magnesium malic is 1. Z-score is, none of them are particularly high. Frequently I've seen Z-scores sky high. All of these are weak suggestions. The magnesium malate generally is something which there's documentation on helping with chronic fatigue syndrome, so that is the one on the list which I would be tending to include in the list. Okay, so that is basically the long and the short of it. We do have other things. I want to just look at advanced suggestions, and advanced suggestions has a couple of features to it. If you can find it, or if they were, oh, I know why it doesn't show up, because I have to change it to advanced level. Now when I go back to actually let's go back over to changing microbiome, and no, it's not there. I need to add it there. So let's go over to, not special studies, research features, advancing. And now we have we should have, unless I have inadvertently removed it, right there. Show links to studies for suggestions. That is on this one. I will toss it on the other screens. And what it does is it has some particular good aspect to it. And I'm going to go and toss in which one? Jason's criteria, because she wasn't doing the best. And we going to tick here. So it's the kitchen sink suggestion. We have the commercial probiotics there, and we will click everything because, as I said, we're doing kitchen sink, and we just go and click it. Now, the reason I did this one is because this little item will show up. And let's take a look here. For example, minocycline probiotics. If you click this one, you will now see why we have therapeutic suggestion. Remember the bacterioids? That was 2 times high. Minocycline reduces it. Akkermansia, it increases. You were low on Akkermansia. We have another one where it says it increases contradictory studies, which unfortunately comes in. Roseburia increases, which you're also low in. So what we have here is the evidence trail for why we suggested minocycline, all the studies and links to them, which means you have complete disclosure as to how that suggestion was created. Keyword. Rather than saying, oh, our expert says you should take this, I'm saying, well, excuse me, the artificial intelligence is the expert, and it is a good artificial intelligence system. It will show you exactly how and why, and link to the literature that made the suggestions from. In other words, you don't have to trust it. You can check it yourself. You can go through every single study yourself and verify that what was put into the database was correct. And if there ain't gotchas about how the study is done, you all can become aware of that. So other things, for example, let's take a look at inulin number 1 study, which is probably going to be a whopping big list. Oh yes, there it is. We have 37 citations, all of which are specifying inulin, and here is specifying a bacteria which was identified as an item to be modified. So now we have complete evidence. And remember, we have about 1.8 million of these individual lines in a database. So it's just applying the ones which applies to your microbiome automatically, and you can trace things back if you want. And people have, and they've generally appreciated not having to read through all those studies, which a good medical practitioner should do, but I know of none who actually do it. Okay, so at this point in time, I'll shut up and finish the blog post, which will be extracting out what should be taken, or what I read should be taken, weighing in the factors. Remember that here, let's go back and show it again. Notice the one I just did by hand, it's not added to the packet. So it just keeps adding it. You can empty it and start from scratch, or if you do, just give me a suggestion, it will empty it automatically for you. Again, trying to save you from having to remember all the steps, just does it for you. And so what I will do is I will go through these numbers to do evaluation. Priority here is there for simplification, but usually when I walk through, especially with chronic fatigue syndrome, I go through and use my knowledge of chronic supplements which are being used in chronic fatigue syndrome and what suggestion, and try to make a slightly superior list of the two of them. Okay, that's it.